Hello there, and welcome to Introduction to Anthropology Home Edition, Week 4. This week is a shorter week than usual. If we were on campus, Thursday would be the Honors Convocation in the morning and the Elk and Isaac Research Symposium in the afternoon, and we wouldn't have any classes, and so we'd only be meeting one time. There's not a film to watch this week, although there will be one next week. And so really there's just 2 readings and an assignment about those things. I'm going to talk you through some of that content to help you put the things that you read in context and help you understand the assignment. And I'm going to begin by showing you where all the stuff is, like I usually do. So here we are at the course web. And again, in the announcement, you will find the instructions for the week that you received by email on Monday morning. We scroll down here, just like we always do. Whoa, there we go. Here we are, the week of April 13th. The first thing that I would recommend that you do is do the virtual fieldwork assignment. It's about gender, the topic of the week. Last week, you can read what's going on here, but in short, what I want you to do is to reflect upon the culture, the community that you've been representing in this virtual fieldwork project, and think about the ways in which gender is important to the community. When you reflect upon it, when you think about it, is there a specific gender composition of the community? Is it all, as far as you can tell, is the community exclusively male or female? And do you think that this influences the culture? And when you think about that, does the culture that you are representing, does it reinforce or challenge widely held stereotypes about gender in the United States? These are just some of the things that I'd like you to think about and write about in approximately 300 words. This is the last of the regular scheduled virtual fieldwork assignments, and next week I will give you the instructions for putting these weekly assignments together into a tight ethnography of the culture that you have been representing. And we're back. This is the mini lecture that you're watching. Here's a discussion forum wherein you can answer some questions about the content for the week, about the stuff that I'm talking about in the mini lecture, and the stuff that you're supposed to read about down here. And it's a little bit different this week in that you can only post an answer up until the official deadline for the assignment. Otherwise, it seems a little bit unfair for folks to be able to go back the week following the assignment to go and post some things on the discussion forum. The point of the discussion forum is for you to write better assignment answers. So you have to do it this week before Sunday at 5. And here's the assignment, and I'll talk about these a little bit at the end. The theme of the week is identities and inequalities. And when we talk about identities and inequalities in large-scale, socially complex societies like ours, or like India, where Dadi's family was located, that was the film that you were to have watched for last week, what we're actually talking about is social stratification. Social stratification is an incredibly important concept for anthropologists, archaeologists like myself, and sociologists. In our department, we regularly offer a 300-level course on social stratification focused primarily in the United States. But anthropologists recognize that social stratification is present, has been present in large-scale, complex societies all around the world. What social stratification means is that stratification refers to strata or layers. So in archaeology, we talk about stratigraphy as the recording and interpretation of the layers of an archaeological site. There's a type of pastry or casserole actually called a strata that's made up of different layers. When sociologists and anthropologists talk about social stratification, what we're talking about is levels of power and privilege in society. And the connection that this has to identity is that, unfortunately, we don't get to choose what level of society we are born into. And there are there are structures in place that are the product of history and culture that we are only dimly aware of that exist to keep those layers the way they are and to keep people in the layer into which they were born. That was true in ancient Egypt, that was true in ancient Rome, that is true in India where Dotti's family lived, and that's true in the United States, unfortunately. And so that these types of structural inequalities are intimately connected to our identities, how we identify in society, how we represent ourselves, but also how other people identify us and and treat us in society. So I'd like to take your mind back to the film that you watched for last week and then the topic of gender and families. One of the reasons that arranged marriages continue to be so important in South Asian culture has to do with caste. And caste is a form of identity and a form of inequality that is integral to social stratification in South Asian society. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, that part of the world. And so, because it is a form of social stratification that we do not typically have in United States society, given our history as a settler nation established by folks from Europe and Africa, it's a particularly useful way, I think, to think through the issues of identity inequality, what they have to do with social stratification and even marriage and gender. And then, when we come to some understanding of how these things work over there, literally on the other side of the world, in a culture that is removed from most of our family's experiences here, we're exercising cultural relativism, right? Suspending our judgment until we understand how something works. Then we can make a comparison to similar situations in the United States. And we can see how social stratification operates in both similar and also different ways in two different societies. So thinking about Dotti's family and marriage, the oldest two sons, Mohinder and Meherlal, if you'll recall, they had arranged marriages. They were not featured in the film, so we can only speculate what were some of the qualities that Dada and Dadi were looking for in a prospective daughter-in-law. And for a rural farm family, such as they were in the 1980s, they probably had a lot of say in who the daughter-in-law was going to be. And that's probably how they were thinking about it as well. So of course they were looking for personal characteristics, who would mesh well with their son and maybe even and eventually fall in love with, build love in the context of family. Who's compatible? Who can they get along with? I mean, the daughter-in-law is going to be living in their house, right? Who's going to be a productive member of the family business. Of course, these are characteristics they were likely paying attention to in prospective daughters-in-law, but there's also some rules in their culture. And they practice something called village exogamy, which means that the prospective daughter-in-law who's going to move into their family must be from a different village. That's what exogamy means. The prospective spouse should come from outside the village exogamy. And they also then simultaneously practice caste endogamy. And I'll talk more about caste in a little bit, but everyone in South Asian society is born into a caste category, and at that caste category into which you are born has traditionally influenced to a great degree to whom you may be married, especially in the context of arranged marriages like this. So among Dadi's family belongs to a caste community called Jat, J-A-T. And that means that the prospective daughters-in-law should have also come from the Jat community. So a prospective daughter-in-law not only has to come from a different village, but must also be of the same caste. I think it goes without saying here that the prospective daughter-in-law should be a she, should identify and be identified as a woman, as a she. It also goes without saying that the prospective daughter-in-law would be Hindu, because Dadi's family is, maybe I didn't mention this last time, and maybe it wasn't apparent to you, but Dadi's family is most certainly a Hindu family. The whole Jat caste are Hindus, and so if the prospective daughter-in-law is supposed to belong to the same caste, it definitely belongs to the same religion, and so now we actually have about 4 criteria there that a prospective daughter-in-law must meet in order to form a successful arrangement to marriage arrangement with one of the 2 sons who had arranged marriages. It has to have a particular gender identity, has to have a particular religious identity, has to have a particular caste identity, and has to be from a place or not from a place, as it may be. And one of the ways in which this functions as it relates to social stratification in the where Dada and Dadi's family live in rural India, North India, and Haryana state, is that the caste community to which they belong, the Jats, have historically been the land-owning caste. They own the lands. They're the farm families that produce produce food. They own the means of production. It may not seem like they were very wealthy, but there are many people who would love to own land and to be farmers and to have some control over their destiny. Right? There are castes and castes and castes of people whose families have not historically owned land. So having a cultural rule, a belief and practice that's learned but widely shared among the community that sons should be married to daughters-in-law who belong to the same caste, it has the function of keeping land in the same set of families, and it has for generations and generations. To the extent that land, the means of production, is a form of wealth, that has kept land wealth, in the same set of Jat families in Haryana for generations and generations. What do all these things have in common? Well, I suppose the first thing that they have in common is that they are identities. They're ways in which individuals represent themselves in the world and are identified by other people. So all of us have a gender identity, a class identity. If we were raised in South Asia, we would have a caste identity. In the United States, especially, we have a race identity. Our ethnic identity may be important to us. We have a religious identity and a national citizenship type identity, and obviously all of these types of identities, these categories of identity, intersect in individuals so that we are some combination of these and other things as well. Do you have total control over how you identify? I mean, I would like to think that individuals have some influence over their self-presentation and how they choose to identify and move through the world. But on the other hand, we do not have total control over that. When the cop pulls me over, he identifies me as a middle-aged white man of a certain class. I don't like that. I don't like that some of us get treated differently than other people, but I don't really have control of that as I move through the world, for example. The second thing that all these have in common is that they're socially constructed. They are the product of shared beliefs and practices in a particular community, society. So gender is different from biological sex. Biological sex is largely natural. Has to do with chromosomes and hormones and body parts and so forth. Gender, on the other hand, as you know from last week, are the beliefs and practices that are learned and shared, that are associated with sexed bodies. So that people do gender, have beliefs and practices related to gender that are very different in time and space. They're the product, the construction of the society into which people are born. Today, little boys and little girls are dressed in pink and blue by their loving grandparents who think that that's natural, but 100 years ago it was not. Class is similar. While it is, you might make the argument that it is natural that some people have more money than others. When we talk about class in this way, we're talking about the cultural beliefs and practices that go along with people who belong to different classes. What is acceptable and appreciated in the country club set is different than what's acceptable and appreciated in the trailer park set, if you take my meaning. And that's the way in which we use class in the United States, which is kind of a product of the Cold War. Hear me out. The way that we use class in the United States as a proxy for wealth is different than the way that class has historically been used in European societies. In European societies, class historically referred to nobility and commoners. This was true in ancient Rome. This was true in ancient Egypt as well. Right? Some people were born into families who were destined to be powerful in society and own land and have special rights and privileges, whereas other people were born into families that did not have land or access to power. This is how kings get to be kings. They are born into certain families. At least that's how it's supposed to be. The communists took that idea and recognized that after the Industrial Revolution, there was a class of people that owned the means of production, the land and the factories, and that was a small number of families in relation to the larger society that did not have access to owning factories and land, and from that premise developed the ideas of class revolution. right? That it should be that the means of production, the factories and the land, should be owned in common by everyone, and that, of course, led to the Russian Revolution, etc., etc., etc. And so in the United States, not only is one of our founding myths that all men are created equal. That's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. We find these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, such that we do not have class here in that way. Right? No family is destined to be the king of the United States. That was an important part of our founding document. And then, subsequent to the Russian Revolution and the export of international communism, the official ideology in the United States is that we do not have bourgeois and proletariat, but rather everyone has the opportunity to move up the social ladder if they work hard enough. And so in that way, the way that we in the United States use the word class as a proxy for wealth is actually very different than the way it's historically been used around the world to refer to layers or strata in complex societies. Caste is specific to South Asian society, and it is a category into which someone is born. And as we've seen, as I open this up, it's a category that influences to a great degree who one is supposed to marry. Historically, it has influenced, although not dictated, individuals' professions, such that some named castes refer to professions that used to exist or continue to exist, potters and laundry people and so forth. In theory, castes can be ranked on a scale of purity such that the highest, purest caste are priests or Brahmins, and this continues to be a very important caste in the context of the Hindu religion, such that there are families who are historically born into the priesthood of various types. The lowest caste groups into which someone could be born might have historically been born into dirty, dirty professions, like literally cleaning the shit out of the street and removing the dead animals from the city. Somebody has to do that work. And back in the day, when there weren't municipal corporations issuing contracts for such work, who did it? Members of families who were born into low caste categories were the people who did that. Today, it's people who were born into those caste categories that largely get those municipal contracts to do the dirty work in modern cities. And finally, the existence of caste as a source of individuals' and families' identities has its origins in myth. So literally, one of the early creation myths of the Hindu religion, it's not the only one. If you take South Asian Identities that I'm teaching in the fall, we'll learn a lot about the Hindu religion and South Asian culture, and we'll learn that it's very heterogeneous and there's many different origin myths and so forth. But one of the earliest ones describes the way in which a primordial god that existed before the world and before humanity existed literally sacrificed itself in order to create the world, and from its head sprung the Brahmins or priestly caste, from its arms sprung the Kshatriya or the warrior and kingly caste, and from its legs came the land-owning caste, and from its feet came the servant and serf castes. Subsequent literature described the way in which the mixing of these four primordial castes led to a much larger number of castes as existed at the time. about 2,000 years ago. It's understood it has historically been understood, like way back in the day, that individuals belonging to different castes actually are physically different from one another. They had different combinations of humors and so forth. Do you believe that that is true? That this is a primordial category into which you were born that makes you different from other people who are born into different categories? I suspect that most of you listening to this are shaking your head saying, no, I don't believe that that is a natural, true, biological, physical feature of our world, that there are castes into which people are born. And so for we as outsiders looking over there, we say, my gosh, of course this is a socially constructed category that seems to exist to perpetuate wealth in the hands of some families and exclude it from other families. We see it as a source of social stratification, not as a natural phenomenon. But just because it is a social construction that has its basis in myth does not mean that it does not mean that it has no importance in modern society. So discrimination on the basis of caste is outlawed in the Indian constitution. India became independent from the British Empire in 1947, and its constitution was ratified, I believe, in 1950. And written into the constitution is the illegality, the prohibition against discrimination on the basis of caste. Kind of like our founding documents in the United States talk about how all people, men, are created equal. So in South Asia today, in India today, if you can demonstrate that you've been denied a job or housing on the basis of your caste identity, you can sue. Right? There are government agencies and organizations similar to the ACLU that take these cases on pro bono. But yet, just because it is illegal to discriminate against someone on the basis of caste does not mean that caste is no longer important. Caste is traditionally important in the arrangement of marriages, for example, taking it back to Dadi's family. So that, although discrimination on the basis of caste is illegal, caste figures into the arrangement of marriages in a very prominent and important way. Allow me a demonstration. Here we are. Take a look at the Times of India today. Yeah, they are dealing with all the same stuff we are. It's kind of an artifact in time. They locked down about the same time we did, but when they locked down, there were only just a couple cases in the country that were still coming in from outside. There was no person-to-person contact, community transmission yet, and so fingers crossed. It looks like India might have gotten to this thing before it became awful, but I digress. The Times of India is like USA Today. I don't find it to be a great source of journalism, but it's the thing that's pushed under your door at a hotel. Classified ads are huge. If we scroll down here to the matrimonial search, let Simply Mary introduce you to someone special. A key difference here is that most often this is going to be done by the parents of prospective bride or groom. So let's say that we're going to look for a groom, age 18 to 25. We can choose their religion. Look, these are all basically identity categories. Let's look for a Hindu. Let's look for someone who's... Look at all those languages. Oh my gosh, what a complex society. And that's what we mean by complex societies. There's so many different ways to be. Different professions, different types of identities. Anyway, looking for a Hindi speaker. And let's look at the caste. Oh my gosh, there are so many of them. And even so many different kinds of Brahmins. I can sit here and talk to you about how many different castes there are while this thing scrolls. I do hope that you've watched along this far to see this, because when I do this in class, it's actually pretty dramatic. I like watching people watch this. Let's give it a minute. There you go. Wow. So you can say it doesn't matter, but the fact that this is based upon the people who have submitted themselves or their sons or daughters into the matrimonial ads, and have chosen a caste name, chosen a caste identity. So most people seem to do that. You say, well, wait a minute. I'm not Hindu. I'm a Christian. Christians don't have caste. Yeah, they do. Well, this doesn't work that way. But in South Asia, the concept of caste also often includes concepts of denominations. So the Catholics and Catholics and Lutherans, or Catholics and Methodists might be identified by others as belonging to different castes. I've been using the word caste unproblematically here, and I'm going to kind of back up for a second and say that caste is actually an English word that comes from the Portuguese, who first described this kind of system. The word in India is the word in South Asian languages for caste is jati. And when I was learning Hindi, and I first looked up the word jati in a dictionary, in a Hindi-English dictionary, some of the translations were kind, like what kind of thing is there. Species, because in Hindi, jati is used that way. So biologists would talk about this type of animal, or this jati of animal, and that jati of animal. And another word that the word jati translated as, in addition to kind and species, in many dictionaries, is race. We've talked about race earlier on in the semester. We deconstructed its biological reality. It is not a biologically real thing. Not to get all into it here, because my video is already getting a little bit long, but if you remember back to like the second and third and fourth week of class, we spent a lot of time applying the principles of genetics and evolution to humans, to realize that that's just not how it works, right? You cannot subdivide the human species into 3 or 4 biologically distinct categories. It just doesn't work that way. But yet in the United States, we know that racial categories are tremendously important. They're ascribed. They're a category into which a person is born. You have maybe a little bit of control over how you present yourself in the world, but that cop that pulls you over is going to put you into racial category almost certainly, whether you want them to or not. It's the product of the United States history as a slaveholding nation, through the Civil War and Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement and into the present. So that the racial categories that we use are not the product of biology or evolution, but are rather the product of history and culture. So they're socially constructed. Right? Race is a source of identity. It's a source of it's socially constructed, and to not to overstate the obvious, but it's clearly a source of social inequality. Right, social stratification in the United States is based, I would say, primarily on race, and it's a myth. It's a powerful myth, but it's a myth nonetheless. Is it the same as caste? I mean, caste is a category into which a person is born that is a source of social inequality. It's socially constructed and based in myth. Race is a category into which someone is born, is a source of social inequality, it's a source of identity, and is socially constructed and based in a myth. Are caste and race the same thing? There's some discussion questions out there on the discussion forum. This is a topic that is discussed in the reading for today, in the reading for next week, rather, the textbook chapter. There are important similarities between caste and race, and there are also important differences. And so these are some of the things that I would like you to think about. Now, I'm just going to briefly talk about the next things on the list. Ethnicity. Is ethnicity the same as race? No, but it's closely related, so that we teach a 300 level sociology course in our department called Race and Ethnicity. But I hope if you think about it now in your head, you can see how ethnicity, especially in some times and places, can have a very similar functional role in society as race or caste. A category into which someone is born has to do with social inequality and is socially constructed and largely imaginary and based on myth. Religion can function in that way too. Think Northern Ireland and the troubles there. Is any of that really about religious ideology and theology? No, it was about who controlled the government, who controlled the land, and the categories into which people were born, and the categories that people were allowed that people married, and so on, and so forth. Citizenship and nationality, we don't really have a choice what our nationality is. It's just a crapshoot of where we're born, and depending on what kind of passport we have, or if we have one or not, clearly that's socially constructed, not a product of biology. It definitely influences our identity and how much relative power we have in society. So it's a source of social stratification. So basically all these things do that stuff. The damn thing is that most of the time we don't even realize how social stratification functions. And that's because it's all these issues of identities and inequalities are intimately connected to habitus. You remember habitus, the concept that I introduced you to when we were talking about culture? How it is that so many important beliefs and practices that are learned and shared among a community are not things that we think about or talk about on a daily basis, except under special circumstances, maybe explaining them to outsiders. And because everyone around us has learned similar practices, they seem natural. I use the example of the way in which we use the toilet, that everybody thinks the way they do it is the right way, the clean way, the natural way, but it's not. It's a cultural way, and that other people do things differently, and they think about the way they do it as natural. Social inequality is that way. Most of us don't walk around in the world thinking about, in the United States, most of us don't go walking around thinking about our racial identity. I mean, especially white people don't. Most white people do not walk around thinking, hey, I'm a white person who was born into a particular identity that has given me a certain degree of power and privilege in society. And that will be perpetuated when I marry another white person and have kids who are born into that identity category, and the police will treat my kids differently. I'm not joking, although I may sound that way because I'm still learning how to broadcast like this. It's deadly serious. And most white people have been raised to not notice or not think about this stuff. So this article is incredibly widely read. It was written in 1988 by a white lady, a white professor, who recognized that she had a lot of privileges in society that were just sort of given to her that she never asked for. And she wrote them out in the form of, for example, number 4, I can go shopping alone and be pretty well sure that I will not be followed or harassed. If you're white and you're listening to this, that may just seem natural to you that no one is going to harass you in the store or follow you around like you're a shoplifter. If you are not white, you almost certainly have had this experience at some point in your life, and it is almost patronizing for me to say it this way, but the white kids need to hear it too. You see what I mean? I might as well apply this to myself. You may have noticed that I'm a white guy, and I don't necessarily love everything about that, but, that's how you perceive me. I can swear, dress in secondhand clothes, not answer my email without people having to say, well, that's how white people are. You better believe that my non-white colleagues probably, on our campus, definitely dress better than the average white professor, and probably don't swear in class, because you know what? If they piss somebody off, the student's going to put in their course evaluations, you know how those people are, or at least they'll think that. I can take a job without having other people say, gosh, he got that job because of affirmative action. I have in my life, I have been awarded things on the basis of affirmative action. I went to a university where I was I was always only the single kid from a rural background in the room. I did well in school, but my high school, being a rural public school, didn't have any AP classes. Right? I didn't even really know what that was. And then I realized that many of my friends in my freshman year dorm were almost sophomores because of all of the AP classes that they had taken. Clearly, there was some degree of affirmative action to try to diversify the class. But you know what? You probably never suspected that about me by looking at me, because, hey, Brad's a white guy. And what I'd like you to do in the assignment for this week is to go through some of these. It's really just a page. I mean, read the content, read the stuff around it, but go through this and say, gosh, has the world changed in since 1988 when this was written? This would be a great time to come out to the discussion forums and see what other people in the class think. I want you to pick one. What's one example of something that's no longer valid today? I would like to think that that race relations in the United States have moved in the direction of equality since 1988. But clearly, I just picked out some of those things that still seem to be a type of privilege that white people get that others don't. But you know what? There's going to be some that aren't. Think about it, discuss. And I'm asking you to write about that in the assignment. Same thing with caste and race. How are they similar? How are they different? And once you've had some discussion over the course of 7 days, you write the assignment. It's very straightforward. If you listen to this and you read the thing, you can do number 1. You can do number 2. Number 3, I'm asking you to think and compare. The Lavenda and Schultz reading will give you some insight into that, as will the discussion board, and the same thing. The last 2 questions have to do with Macintosh. So that is what you are supposed to do this week. Relatively short week. And if you want to talk about this stuff on Tuesday, which is our regularly scheduled class for the week, I will see you at office hours. Come talk to me. I'm just hanging out here, sitting at my desk, staring at a screen, waiting for people to talk to me. See you then.